Welcome to Reevaluations 101. There are 5 main steps to creating a reevaluation. The first is in the IEP itself. The second is under the Special Ed Eligibility tab. The third is the Evaluation Editor. The fourth is the Reevaluation Determination Form. And the fifth is the Parent Consent Form. When completing a reevaluation, the first step is in the IEP under the Education Plan. Here you will want to make sure you will click Review as normal, but then click the paper next to Reason for Meeting and you will get a template bank where you will need to choose Reevaluation, and this will pop up in the IEP for you. The next important part to check in the Education Plan are your dates. When you type in your meeting date, the IEP implementation date and the IEP end date should automatically fill for you. If not, you can hit the tab key on the left side of your keyboard. The most important difference in this section with the reeval is that the most recent eligibility date will now also be the date of your meeting, because the eligibility date has now changed since you've had a reevaluation, or you will have a reevaluation on this student. Next part in the IEP is under the Exceptionality Classification. You will click on the Get Special Ed Status from Enrollment button as usual. Check and make sure it's the correct area of exceptionality. Check as if there's supposed to be a secondary area. And this is where you will make some changes in your dates as opposed to a regular IEP. The new eligibility date will be your meeting date, and your new reevaluation date will be 3 years, exactly 3 years from your meeting date. Now sometimes when you click on the calendar, it doesn't give you enough years to choose from. It might only go down to 2018. Click on that last date and you'll get some more years to pick from to get you to the 3 years that you want. If there's a secondary, like speech, and that's being evaluated at the same time, you want to make sure you put in the same eligibility date, and if they qualify, the same reevaluation date as above. Now, if your 3-year date, that's exactly 3 years apart from your meeting date, falls on a weekend, that is fine. Go ahead and keep it that date. The only time it will not work, one time I had a meeting on leap year on February 29th, and when I try to put it in for February 29th, 3 years in the future, it would not do it because, of course, there was not a leap year that year, and so I had to do the 28th. Okay, and then the final part in the IEP is under the team meeting. You want to make sure that you put this at the beginning of your meeting minutes, and it should also be the first part on your agenda for your IEP, because if you have a student who did not qualify to continue for special education services, there would not be a reason to have an IEP meeting, so this would be the only part of the meeting that would be held. So you want to make sure, especially if they do qualify, that you discuss what was determined for the reeval, if the student continued to meet eligibility and for what services, or if they didn't, like if they're going to be, they no longer qualify for speech. You want to mention all of that at the very beginning of your IEP minutes, and then you can go on business as usual with the rest of your minutes. Alright, now that you're done with the IEP portion of the reevaluation, the next section is under the Special Ed Eligibility tab, right here. And I have a before and after of what this section should look like. When you open it up, it may say reeval here, it may say initial. You want to make sure you change that to reevaluation. Here's my after down here, so I'll click on that first. The second thing you want to do is clear this date of parent consent. So when you are done, it should be blank. Next part, check the exceptionality. Might be one area, might be 2. Clear out the previous case manager's name and put your name in. And then the eligibility date, here is the original date. Your new eligibility date is going to be the date of your reeval meeting. And just like in the IEP, the reevaluation date will be exactly 3 years from your eligibility date. And then, of course, click yes if the student continued to qualify, and yes if the reevaluation was completed on time, and hopefully it was. You would need to click no here if a student did no longer qualify. For example, if they are no longer going to receive speech services, you would want to put that as a no here, and there would no longer be a reevaluation date. Something else you might want to note is that we do not ever need to change the Events tab. This is something that automatically fills in for us. And of course, click Save. Alright, the next section is under Documents. You're going to want to go to New Documents, and this is called Create New Evaluation, and then you will choose Evaluation Editor and click Create Document. And you'll get a box that looks like this that pops up. You will need to make the evaluation date the date of your meeting. The evaluation type, of course, is a reevaluation. And the consent date, as long as the parent came to the meeting and signs the consent form, should also be the day of the meeting. So the evaluation date and the consent date should be the date of the meeting, and the evaluation type is a reevaluation. All the rest of the information, of course, this is blocked out for privacy. The student name, the student number, the birth date, school name, grade should all automatically fill in for you. Now, when you click Save, this will show up under Evaluations in your IC, and it will look like an open IEP, like an open piece of paper. You're going to want to click on the Evaluation Editor once, and then go up and click Lock, because you do want to lock this document. You're going to get a pop-up that asks you if it's okay that the document is locked. Click Yes, and then you should get your little gold lock on top of your Evaluation Editor. The next part is also under Documents. You will need to go back to New Documents, and this time you will go to Create New Simple Form, and then on the drop down you're going to want to pick Reeval Determ Rev 2, and make sure you have the current school year and your school listed under Enrollment, and then click Create Document. Now, if this doesn't work and you're in Chrome, you may need to try using Internet Explorer. After you click Create Document, it will ask you to save the form in your own files. So what I've done underneath my special ed file for the year, I've created a folder for reevals, and that's where I save these documents. It comes up, this is what the document will look like. Your numbers will be different here. Reeval, Determ, Rev 2. What I like to do is I put the student's last name as part of the document name, so it will be easier to reference later. And then, of course, you'll click Save, and then what will happen is this PDF form will show up down at the bottom, and also have the student's name here if you do that. And then you'll want to double click on this PDF form. It'll actually show up at the very bottom corner of your screen. You're going to want to open that up to begin working in the reevaluation determination form. You have several things to fill in on your reevaluation determination form. You'll have the date of the meeting at the top, and then the student's name. Your school name automatically pops in. You'll need to put in the student's date of birth. Now, this date right here is the date the reevaluation was originally due. This is the date listed on your previous IEP. This is the date you had to have the reeval meeting by. This is not your new reevaluation due date. It's the old reevaluation due date. The next part is all the data that you reviewed in the fall, probably in September, when you discussed whether more testing was needed. And most of the time you take a look at achievement data, assessments, grades, progress on goals. Now, if a student was OHI, you may also need you might want to check that you have medical records if you got the medical letter from the doctor. If it was speech, you would look at speech and language data. If it's a child that's EBD, you would also look at some behavior intervention plans or behavior scales as well. This is also on the front of the reevaluation determination form, a little further down. This is under Part 2 recommendations. Now, if you did not recommend for the student to be tested any further, you would start clicking no to all of these boxes here. We've got 3 in a row here. Will you click no, no, and no? You leave these blank unless you had any yeses above. And you'll go down here and check no, that no additional data is needed for continued eligibility in the following areas. And this is where you need to write out the full name of the student's exceptionality. For example, you don't want to write OHI, you want to write other health impairment right here. In the third section, if you do not need any other testing, you would check the top box, student continues to meet eligibility for, and then again, write out the full name of the disability and not any acronyms. Now, it could be one, it could be other health impairment, and speech. You would just list all that apply in these areas right here. Now, you're going to want to print this form out and bring it with you to the IEP meeting, because the parent, after you review the information with them, will need to check yes, hopefully, that they agree with the recommendation, and they will then sign and date the form. This next page is considered the back page, or the second page of the reevaluation determination form. This part, the date and the student name, should automatically fill in for you from the front page of the form. You're going to want to type the names of everyone attending your meeting here, your teachers and parents and students and support personnel, and then all of their positions and titles here. And then you're going to want this meeting with you printed out at the meeting so everyone can sign in on it. And then after the meeting, type in your minutes, and it needs to state what the IEP team determined, if the student continues to meet eligibility, and what the exceptionality is, or in the case of maybe with speech, if they no longer meet eligibility and they're dismissed as services. This is where you would write that. It doesn't need to be anything really long, but it does need to be very specific as to what the student is still eligible for as far as services. Okay, the most important part with your reevaluation determination form is that you hit the gray Save button. This is what saves all of your work into IC. And you're going to want to double check this, because sometimes you click the Save button, you go back, you check the form in IC, and it's not in there. So definitely double check this one right here. You also might want to click on the floppy disk save icon. This will save your form also into your folder, the file that you created for it. And in that way, if some reason it ends up being blank in IC, you have your backup form to use to get your information from. Now, unlike the evaluation editor, the reevaluation determination form is not locked in IC. The last step for a reevaluation is the parent consent form. This is not in IC. You actually are going to go to It's Learning under your special education course. You'll look in the Forms Bank folder, and then into the reevaluation folder, and then the consent for placement form. You want to click on that and save it to your files. You're going to print this out and bring it to the reeval IEP meeting with you. You'll have the date of the meeting in these two places and the student name in these two places, and you're going to want to see if your parent will check yes here, if they still want their student to receive special education services, and they will need to sign and date the form here. At the end of your IEP meeting, you're going to want to make sure you have your reeval form with all your signatures, and your parent signatures and your parent consent for placement form ready to turn in to your department head with your IEP.